Earlier on in the programme, we were discussing Rishi Sunak's move to block the SNP's gender reform bill. On Saturday, hundreds gathered in Glasgow to protest against the blocking of the bill. But we've also seen many people protesting against the bill. So here to give us a Scottish perspective is Susan Smith, co-director of For Women Scotland, a women's group who are working to protect and strengthen women and children's rights. Susan, thanks for joining me. I want to ask you first about the reform bill. And what are your principal oppositions to this bill?
Principally, it's because it opens up this process that was limited to a very small number of people, to just about anybody. And there's no safeguards around it whatsoever. And I think, then you start to get into these more intense questions about whether or not actually in law we should be allowing people to change sex, which is a protected characteristics, because of the impact it has on other people. And what we brought a judicial review last year, and the ruling said that when a person gets GRC, they change their sex under the Equality Act for all purposes. So that's a massive thing. And if you're allowing just anybody to walk up and change their sex, you are diluting the protections that are available for women. And not just protections, things like data collection, policy planning, looking at things like gender pay gaps and so on. All of that stuff just becomes meaningless the more people can take advantage of this.
I've been reading a lot about the debates that happened in the Scottish Parliament, the SNP saying that they had rigorous debate, but then at the same time, Nicola Sturgeon saying that the views of feminists around this issue have no merit. And that doesn't sound like a serious debate, does it, if you just completely dismiss the alternative view? What has your experience been of trying to present your view to the SNP?
Oh, it's been awful. So we have spoken to two ministers who were supposed to be leading on this. The first one was Shirley-Ann Somerville. And my colleagues took pages and pages, it was a wad of questions, into her and said, look, these are the things you need to address. These are some of the issues. Now, some of them were less important than others, but there were crucial things about what do you understand a GRC to do, which they continued not to answer. And the current minister, Shona Robertson, refused to answer that. And they kept on saying it doesn't change people's access to any programs or any services or anything like that. It doesn't change anything. And then they went to court and argued the opposite. And they argued actually the same case that the AHRC brought to them a year ago when they said, you are expanding this. We think it's a problem because we think it changes people's rights. And the Scottish government said, no, it doesn't. And then they went to court and made that argument. So they've been spinning two different stories the whole way through this. And so many times when we encountered the civil servants and the ministers, they really didn't seem to have a clue what this was about or what they were doing or how things can be interconnected and how you can have unintended consequences and how you have to look around for things. And they did not even look at the cross-border implications, which was one of the things that the UK government were not happy about, rightly. They had the most superficial and amateur approach to this bill, and I think it's been a shocking reflection on how Scotland's governed.
I mean, isn't one of the problems, you say there that a lot of people just don't understand the issues, and I couldn't help but notice that some of the debates in the London Parliament about all of this have descended into sloganeering and shouting, and that whenever we've heard women who are concerned about their single-sex spaces and the threat that it poses to women's rights to have gender self-ID, you've had politicians, male politicians I should say, shouting at them, saying this is a transphobic dog whistle, saying this is all about hate. And I'm sure you've had those kind of accusations yourself. What do you make of that?
It's after a while you start to get used to it, but I'm not sure you should become desensitized to it, but you do. And yeah, there are some politicians in Holyrood who have made some really actually outrageous and disgusting comments about women who are opposed to this bill. And, they seem to think that at best we're deluded and at worst we're actively evil. And they whip up a lot of hostility. And we saw politicians turning out to that demo in Glasgow this week, and there were signs, which I'm sure you've seen in the press, saying things like decapitate TERFs. And this shouldn't be normalised. Nobody should be normalising this sort of behaviour, and nobody should be excusing it, but they are. And a lot of the people who are very involved in the activism have got track records of making abusive comments, threatening comments, and it's simply not good enough. And it's not good enough for the organisations who are setting up and supporting these rallies not to investigate and publicly condemn all of this.
That's something I do want to ask you about, is the violent rhetoric that's coming from certain activists. You mentioned the sign at the protest saying decapitate TERFs. I think we might have an image of that sign if we could look at that. But there were two SNP politicians standing in front of the sign that an activist was holding saying decapitate TERFs. Of course, it is perfectly possible that that sign was put up. They didn't see it. All the rest of it. There's the sign there that we can see now on the screen. But that kind of violent rhetoric is seen again and again from activists. I know that one of the activists sitting in the gallery during the debates was pictured with an axe on Twitter threatening gender-critical feminists. What is going on here, and why are we seeing this kind of rhetoric?
And a knife. And actually, that person was making the speeches at that rally. It was one of the people who were organising the entire rally. And the politicians were chumming around, and they're all very friendly and praising each other. And every time they have one of these rallies, there's a placard like that. There were actually 4 politicians standing there. The picture that's there is just of the 2, but they were all SNP. And they have all said they didn't see it. Now, that maybe they didn't. But I think if you go to one of these events, you have to be quite careful if you're a politician, because there are going to be signs like that. And these politicians know that. They're supposed to be aware. And that filming was done by The National, which is a hugely pro SNP publication. So obviously, they didn't think it was a problem. There were organisers putting up pictures of some of those placards before they turned up, going, oh, look at these lovely placards we've made. And that was one of them. It was front and centre on some of the pictures.
I mean, I just find it very surprising that people can say they're turning a blind eye to this kind of thing, because I keep hearing, oh, there's violent rhetoric on both sides. But and I would condemn that kind of rhetoric on all sides. But genuinely, when you objectively look at it, I've never seen gender-critical feminists threaten to kill anyone or that kind of thing. And yet I see it all the time, images of guns and things saying kill TERFs and this kind of thing. There is a problem on that side that does need to be addressed by the people who are advocating for those causes, doesn't there?
They do. And, I think we wrote years ago to the Equality Network, because we've been threatened by the singer, headline singer at Trans Pride, and they then withdrew. But some of the people around that went absolutely nuts about it, and then started just repeating this threat and saying, basically saying, well, they deserve it kind of thing. And we actually wrote to Equality Network and said, we know you provide funding for this event. Can you please have a word with these people? And they just said, oh, no, we condemn violence, but no, we can't tell people what to say. One of the people actually organising the event was somebody employed by them, so I'm not sure why they couldn't intervene. And they offered to sit down with us and explain to us why self-ID wouldn't harm our rights. And we said, well, if you've got people threatening us with violence, I'm sorry, we think that does interfere with our rights. But they're a government-funded organisation, and they were not prepared at that point to step in and condemn these threats. So, we're very pleased that the UK government stepped in. Actually, I don't think they had an option, because the Scottish government kept being told what they were doing was going to impinge on the Equality Act. They were told over and over. And they didn't listen. I mean, they say the weight of evidence was in their favour. Well, it was, because they had a very biased process. They invited a load of people who were activists on that side. Some people who weren't particularly senior, some people who weren't particularly knowledgeable in this area. They invited a theatre lecturer to give evidence on statistics because he was one of them, and didn't invite Alice Sullivan until pressed. So the whole process has been shameful. It's been a shocking reflection.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, but we are out of time. Thank you, Susan Smith.
Thank you.